G'day YouTubers. I recently came across a conversation in IRC concerning Dasgregor's preview, I suppose, or introduction to scientific Linux. And I'll just bring that up. You can actually see the link there, and if you want to type it in, or I can include it in the comments section or something like that. But essentially gave it a pretty poor review, and I kind of didn't feel that was fair, so I went through, because I've used Scientific Linux before, and I was actually quite impressed with Scientific Linux. So the first thing is, we need to have a look at the criticisms that were leveled at it. So the first thing I think we should talk about is, who is Scientific Linux written for? What's its target audience? Dasgregor basically wrongfully compares other distributions which are more user focused with Scientific Linux. If we look at the Scientific Linux website, okay, we can see here that Scientific Linux is put together by Fermilab and CERN and various other academic institutions. It is primarily there to reduce duplicated effort for the labs and to have a common install base for various experimenters. Basically, it's saying that it comes from Enterprise Linux, of which we can guess the main source, and has some additional applications which they use in-house, such as Alpine and OpenAFS. Alpine is an email client, and OpenAFS I have no experience with, so I can't tell you what that's for, although I should probably take a look at that. But essentially, this distribution is designed, its goal is to track the upstream Enterprise Linux distribution. Now, let's have a look at this. Right. One of the things that he levels at it is, that it's not that user-friendly, and I'd just like to look at this. Scientific Linux is essentially a commercial enterprise Linux distribution recompiled. They've taken the source code, recompiled, and resulting bound binary is now in RPM form, and then, has to do with what they desire as long as they follow the license from the original source code, which they're doing. They then bundle these binaries into a Linux distribution close to commercial enterprise Linux as they can get it. And I think you can read basically the rest. I think one of the key things we should put here is that he has mistakenly said that, it doesn't have a lot of science programs. And I think that it's not Scientific Linux as a project that's misleading people, but people are misleading themselves about what Scientific Linux is about. Where are all the science programs? The Linux distribution, this Linux distribution is called Scientific Linux because it's made by Scientific Labs. It doesn't mean it has, a whole bunch of applications. It's not scientific it's not focused on scientific applications. It's there so people can do scientific things on it. And it's a good base for if you want to try and compile some code or something like that. Now, anyone who's done some time compiling code, and I know Dasgregor has, because he recently did some conversation on LFS, and LFS is extensively about compiling source code. You need to, as you start introducing things beyond the LFS base, you need to start making specific adjustments. So I'll probably talk about that in another LFS video when I do that. But what I'm most interested in is looking at some of the discussion points. So, as I said, it's not really, it's not really for this purpose, but it's installable by, these applications are installable by repository. So what I mean by that, and if we take this virtual machine which is running, and I'll just log into it. I use the ubiquitous 1980 handle still on my local machines. So if I go and we hopefully might get some yum action, yum search, you might not like it because I'm using yum on the other terminal, but yum search statistics, and we have some statistics things come up here. Some things like that. So again, it's probably a bit limited. I've opened a lot of repositories, but again, the purpose is not really to be sitting there and providing people with a whole bunch of, you know, a whole bunch of statistics applications or a whole bunch of scientific applications. I guess we can look at things like yum search math or mat lab perhaps, I don't know. Here we go. So they've got some things for reading MATLAB stuff. So it is there. So there are some things there, and if you need the others, you may need to compile them in. Again, these guys are internally focused. They kindly release their distribution because I guess they're sharing it amongst each other. They're working in a collaborative environment, but they're sharing amongst each other. Another thing I want to raise, and by the way, this installation by repository is actually very, very simple. I know he says that you shouldn't have to do that, but let's face it, if you're adding an overlay to Gentoo Linux, that's like adding another repository because you're pulling in an SVN Git or CVS repository. So, but it's very easy. You can just go into add remove software. You can add some software sources in here. It's got some, it's waiting for the package manager lock, which I mean I can clear that if I want to. Let's just clear out this while it's doing it. I don't really need to do all this for the time being. This isn't actually a clean build. Come on, break. Good. You know, this isn't a clean build at the moment, so software sources. And you can see I've added some things here, like RPM Forge, which mind you was actually suggested in the default install. Okay. So I guess what I'm trying to point out is that you know, one can complain about, you know, putting on some additional repositories, but it's not really a big deal because again, these are the ones that were recommended, and I'll talk about RPM Fusion a little bit later, but that RPM Forge is already recommended. The EPEL is already recommended, which if you want to run RPM Fusion you'll need EPEL. It's just part and parcel of that. Okay, but we'll talk about that in a minute. So I've already installed RPM Fusion 6.5, we can talk about that. FFmpeg, I just did a VLC install, funnily enough. So we'll take a look at that actually. So I'll just shut this, actually we'll just go to another workspace. You can see here I'm using GNOME. He was using KDE, which is, you know, personal choice. But if and I'm just bringing up VLC there, but we'll take a quick look at GNOME in regards to the distribution. And that's, if we look on here, here we go. So the default desktop is GNOME. Everything therefore in this distro will be geared around GNOME as much as possible, so that they have less integration issues with it. So you can see here one of the complaints that Dasgregor makes is that the applications are really, really ancient, but I want to demonstrate that this is not exactly true. If I look at KDE, the KDE version that's installed by default in KDE libs is here, 4.3.4. If we actually look, 4.3.4 okay, is actually 2009, and for a stable enterprise release this is actually unacceptable or unexpected. I mean, it's 4 years old, but the idea behind it is not to be flash or something like that, and besides, I even added that before, is that it's not meant to be, you know, kind of KDE focused. It's meant to be GNOME focused, I guess. So I think that really is not sort of valid criticism, is that, you know, yes, they're choosing an older version of KDE, but if you look up KDE 4.3, it's not like it's an ugly distribution of KDE. If we have a look at ugly version of KDE, see 4.3, we get some images up. Alright, I mean, really, is that really that far off what we see today? Is it really that far off? Not really. KDE has stabilized a fair bit since version 4.2, and that actually, I mean, apart from a few things like these colorful icons and things like that, there are some superficial differences here and there, and maybe some performance improvements over time. But the fact is that KDE is KDE since 4.2-ish onwards, and there should be no problem someone running 4.3 on an enterprise computer. It's actually quite an attractive desktop if they really wanted to run it. So if we then look at the other issues, FFmpeg, well, you just saw me I had VLC installed. Okay, again, I know that Dasgregor said, well, he doesn't want to have to add third-party repositories, but RPM Fusion has VLC in there, and I'll discuss the virtues and perhaps pitfalls. I don't even think there are any pitfalls with using RPM Fusion. I've used it before. So, and you can see here I have a fully working version of VLC. VLC depends on FFmpeg, which we can demonstrate by going yum search FFmpeg, and you can see that FFmpeg is available on the system once you've got RPM Fusion and EPEL installed. So, and EPEL just means extra packages for enterprise Linux, in case you're wondering. Okay, so what I'll do is we'll have a look at the next criticism. So that's not entirely true. You can actually do that. Okay, why is FFmpeg not installed by default? It is patent encumbered. There are a certain number of codecs in there that if you were to try and install this under US soil, or on US soil, you're technically breaching a patent, and Red Hat doesn't want to do that. And that's fine. They're an American company. They're an American publicly listed company. They don't want to install something that may in fact jeopardize their business model, which is fine. Just because something is open source, it doesn't mean it should be installed. Or just because something is free software, it doesn't mean under the current legal framework that we should be just installing it on any old system, especially when that will be a standard operating environment. A lot of industry, a lot of IT companies out there are installing VLC by default. VLC relies on FFmpeg for the most part that I've seen. I haven't seen an installation that doesn't rely on FFmpeg, although I'm sure it's probably possible. But the point is that most have FFmpeg, to the best of my knowledge, because FFmpeg provides an extensive suite of codecs. Okay, and by doing so, it supports things like lib, H.264. Okay, which is which is a protected codec. It's a royalty encumbered codec, from what I understand. So it's not royalty free. So if you look up H.264. Okay, let's have a look. Let's look at patent licensing. So again, there is patent licensing behind that. The Red Hat needs to consider that. If you look up FFmpeg, let's have a look. FFmpeg patent, right? Legal considerations. Even FFmpeg is saying on their website, patents. They'll basically say that they're not legal experts. Does FFmpeg use patent algorithms? We do not know. We are not lawyers, not qualified to answer this, and we have never written any patents to implement any part of FFmpeg. So they're basically doing clean room implementation of codecs. So they can't answer that question. Okay, they don't know what is patent and what is not. However, it's not that there are very interesting technologies in the RPM-based distros such as Fedora, from which CentOS, Red Hat Enterprise Linux are developed from, and hence Scientific Linux is developed from by proxy. There are lots of interesting pieces of software, but it doesn't mean that Red Hat is going to include all of them, because it has this this issue. Like, for example, look, H.264, which I just mentioned before, it was the first one that came to mind. ITU draws attention to the possibility of practice implementation may involve claim intellectual property right. So they're not saying that the evidence is convincing or anything like that. It's just a possibility, and Red Hat is simply reducing their liability, so to speak. Mind you, Dasgregor uses Gentoo Linux fairly extensively, and I'm going to give you an interesting one on Gentoo Linux. Okay, you go and look for a distribution that uses CD record by default. Okay, CD record. I'll show you something. I've actually got CD record installed on my system. I will demonstrate. So enter. Okay, cd record. Right. Okay. Well, I don't. Maybe I don't. Oh, CDR tools. Sorry, it's CDR tools. Okay, and I've got that installed. Okay, but it doesn't mean that a distribution can release this without problem. It's one of those issues. This is under copyright issue because we have CDDL code beside GPL code, and not many people are sure whether it violates the copyright principles embodied in each of those licenses. So yeah, it's something that you can take up on Wikipedia. You can actually look at the controversy about it if you want to. Gentoo Linux can have it available because it doesn't compile on the server that Gentoo is running. It compiles on the client machine, which means for all intents and purposes, as long as you're not violating any particular license, you can compile that and have that on your system. You're not distributing it around, and in fact Gentoo has an extensive framework in Portage for handling such cases where you might not be able to distribute resulting binary. I can think of one of them, which is Firefox. You're not actually meant to redistribute Firefox with its trademarked Firefox branding on there. I know some distributions do, but the previous ones have gotten in trouble for this before. Case in point is Debian. Okay, so Debian, for example, won't distribute Firefox per se, but will redistribute their own clone of it, their in-house clone of it called Iceweasel, and it's a clone that's basically taking the upstream source, recompiling it, adding their own Iceweasel trademark. It's not really a trademark. They don't really have any problem with people distributing it, but it's a different symbol and everything like that. It's called Iceweasel. Some companies just can't afford the risk because of the litigious software patent issue. Okay, so I don't think I need to harp on that anymore. Okay, there are reasons why Scientific Linux will not include certain things like FFmpeg, and that's because the upstream developer recommends against it, which is fine. Okay, so what else have we got? Simple screen recorder. I couldn't find it. I got to tell you, that's something for another video. But I think Dasgregor's 1.5 here is that no, I cannot install Simple Screen Recorder at the moment. I mean, I can use FFmpeg to do a screencast anyway if I want to use a script, or write my own script, or grab one of the various scripts online. So I don't think that's really too much of an issue. But yes, he's right. You can't install Simple Screen Recorder at the moment. Okay, RPM Fusion is a legitimate third-party repo. I don't want RPM Fusion to be treated like a second-class citizen, which we need to have a look at this and judge for ourselves. So RPM Fusion, okay. So becoming an RPM Fusion contributor, having packaging experience in Fedora is much preferred. Okay, but newcomers are welcome too. However, if you are a newcomer, i.e. you are not a Fedora sponsored packager, you must get sponsored, which means you need to find someone to guide you through the procedures. In other words, they're saying you need to basically follow Fedora guidelines. Okay, and we can actually see that Control F packaging guidelines. See this? Reviewers should ensure that any deviations from the Fedora packaging guidelines are sane and justified in the package they are reviewing. In other words, these guys are trying to remain compatible with upstream. Yeah? So that's one thing. Another thing. Okay, let's have a look at the homepage. RPM Fusion provides software that the Fedora project or Red Hat does not want to ship. That software is provided as recompiled RPMs for all current Fedora versions and Red Hat Enterprise 5 and 6. Okay, basically you're using legitimate repos. Okay, they're not sanctioned by Fedora, but they are binary compatible with Fedora. They're binary compatible with Enterprise Linux. Okay, so they have a proper mailing list, they have a proper steering committee. It's not some dodgy, it's not some dodgy repo with no PGP key or something like that. Okay, it's a proper repository. You can, use it. Okay, it doesn't mean that you're going to maintain the baseline. For example, if I went back to my current installation that I'm working on, my Firefox got updated. I don't know, it might show you. So I was showing it's 17, but the version that I just installed, which should probably show up on the next time I actually run it after all the updates are done, will show, I think it's Firefox 23. Again, I don't think Firefox 17 is really that old, because look what they did with the naming conventions with the versions on Firefox. We just have to look at Wikipedia again. Let's have a look. Firefox. Just give that a sec to run up. And what versions? We got any versions here? No, they're not showing the previous versions, because I think it's just getting too ridiculous anyway. Here we go. No, just not there, honestly. But well, we can look up Firefox 17 if we really want to, find out when that was released. You know, I don't know. Seriously. I mean, I don't want to waste your time with this, but seriously, I mean, with the naming convention where they went one up every single version, you can imagine that Firefox 17 isn't that old. History of Firefox, here we go. Version 17. Version 17. Look, 2012. Is that really that old? I mean, if it's a currently patched, what if they backported code with, you know, several fixes or whatever? Seriously. I mean, the fact is, this is enterprise Linux. It's not really for desktop use primarily. It's probably used on servers where they're not even using a head. It's a headless mode or whatever, running in a cluster or something like that. As if you're going to really be that worried that your Firefox version's from 2012. I mean, let's get real. Okay. So, yeah, I think we can just kind of put that one to the side. Let's have a look at the other comments I've made. Alright. Space exploration applications. I mean, again, you know, I know we're 2014, but you're talking about computer science experts that are putting this distribution together, not you know, backyard job. If they want a particular application to be integrated into their OS, they'll do it. They might not want to support it outside, and just remember, when they package that damn thing, they have to support it outside. They're happy to provide the distribution as is. They're happy for you to be able to add different repos if you want to, suggesting some themselves. But should we expect them to put these extra math, science, and space you know, I don't even know. Like, for one of the, let me have a look. Let's have a look. Yum search. There's an SPSS PSPP. Maybe it's got that. I don't know. No, it doesn't have it. Maybe search SPSS. Nah, it's probably not going to find it. But I mean, there's SPSS you can get from GNU if you want to. PSPP rather, that you can get from GNU. Yeah, you know, you can go get that if you want to. You probably integrate it, you know, yourself or whatever. You know, what if the libraries are old? Oh well, use a previous version. I mean, again, we're looking for the base. The base of this is just simply a core. It's a core for people to use. Okay. What else? They have not changed in 15 years. Look, I remember this comment that Dasgregor made, making out like, you know, Red Hat really hasn't changed in 15 years. Let's be fair. You know, the last versions of GNOME, right, that they're using here. Well, let's have a look at the panels. Actually, this should probably be the best way. 2.3, 1.3. Let's look at GNOME history of GNOME again. You know, I just keep on going back to the same issues about, you know, current software. GNOME 2.31. GNOME 2. Maybe it'll help me here. GNOME 2. GNOME 2. History. No. GNOME. Maybe we'll have version history. Version. No. No. GNOME 2.3.1. GNOME version history. It's not even showing me, is it? It wasn't that long ago I was actually using 2.31 myself. I mean, you can even use 2.31 in the form of you know, of Mate or whatever, one of these new ones. But look at this, 2.32, 2.31.92. I mean, really, is it that old? Look at this mailing list, 2010. Is it really that old? 4 years old? Is it really? No, it's really not that unrealistic for enterprise Linux. Remember, we're not talking about backyard job. We're talking about this has to be internally supported within, you know, CERN and Fermilab. That's you know, $1 billion business going on there. Okay, $1 billion government/business operation. This has to be rock solid. So they need, probably 4 years of proven track history to know that the software's not going to break on them. Dependencies not being met. Oh, actually, that brings me to another point. If you want to see what Enterprise Linux was, and it wasn't called Enterprise Linux back then, it was a community version, but Red Hat 6, and I mean not Red Hat Enterprise Linux 6, I'm talking about Red Hat 6. That's what it looked like. Okay, so I actually think that is a far cry from this. Give that a second. It's a far cry from this desktop environment that I'm using here. Look at that. Honestly, can you really say that that is anywhere at all like that? You can't. It's light years apart. So, and I showed you that KDE environment before. 4.3 that's installed, or capable of being installed. No. Dependencies not being met. Even with my repos being installed, I haven't had this issue, so I don't know where this is coming from. I don't think that's fair. I told you this before, overlays are not exactly sanctioned by Gentoo. They're available, they're an optional package, they're not installed by default, and they require, in each case, Git, CVS or SVN, because they require third-party software to be obtained from across the internet. We're not talking about on the Gentoo servers or mirrors, we're talking about third-party software. I mean upstream third-party software. And the other thing too, how is Scientific Linux not expandable? I just don't get this. Scientific Linux is expandable by adding the applications that are available within the distribution itself, or by looking at third-party repos such as RPM Fusion or RPM Forge. Perfectly legitimate, or EPL. Perfectly legitimate. A lot of these things are packaged within the guidelines. I mean, RPM Fusion has a free and non-free repository. I myself I've messed around with these applications before that are available on RPM Fusion, never had an issue. And the last point, if you really want bleeding edge, you want that kind of that Red Hat feel, try Fedora. It might be a better option for those who require bleeding edge software. Okay, we need to actually understand that distributions like Gentoo, which aren't all that often used in commonly in enterprise, are versionless. That is, once the update is done, it is the latest version, and that's too bleeding edge for some companies. They don't want to run a server, like this. I mean, there's an article I read years back, why not to run Gentoo on a server because of this update issue. I personally don't have any issue with running Gentoo on my desktop system at home, but, would I run it on a server? I'm not sure. I don't think I want to be compiling everything on that server. I want to be using it for good uptime and making sure that people are served with the files and resources that they need. We need to understand the difference between enterprise Linux and desktop Linux and hobbyist Linux. It's not to say that Gentoo isn't used in enterprises out there. I know for a fact that it is, especially in educational settings. The fact of the matter is that at the moment the RPM-based distros are quite popular in the enterprise. So is Debian. Debian's popular in some enterprise situations, such as web servers. But we just have to accept that this is the way enterprise Linux wants to roll, and that's how it is. Look at this. You can actually see in Gentoo these red packages in the unstable branch are bleeding edge packages. You can see that you even have this unstable in the stable. Interesting enough, upstream is saying that it's not quite there yet, and yet they're including it. And that's grub, mind you. That's your bootloader, damn it. You don't want that to mess up on you. These green packages, they're the ones that are current. You know what I mean? And plenty of current ones there, and ones that aren't too far behind anyway. Look, Python 3.4 and Python 3.3.3. Just examples. So we need to be very careful in saying, oh, this thing's ancient or whatever like that. Some of the software is, post 2009, 2010. It's not completely unreasonable to use this sort of software. And we're not talking 15 years ago. We're talking about 5 years ago at most. The software is well proven, it's battle tested, So, anyway, it's probably a little bit of a rant. I like Dasgregor, don't get me wrong. I really like some of the stuff he does, but I thoroughly disagree with him in this case. And I think he ought to take a look at this, first impressions video that he's done. Have a try again. Use the damn DVD. Net installs, they're there. they're not the recommended way all the time. I mean, some distributions recommend it, like Debian I think recommends a net install, but they provide CDs for a reason. They provide CDs and DVDs for a reason. The only hiccup I had in my installation of Scientific Linux is that I needed to use 2 DVDs, not one. It didn't tell me that straight up. I mean, maybe I could have looked at the FAQ. You know what I mean? Again, that actually brings me to another point. When you're going to review a distribution, look at the fact, what is the target audience? What are they trying to do? Are they trying to appeal, to everyone like an Ubuntu, a Mint, or an OpenSUSE or something like that? No. They are providing, in this case, a common base for their science labs and universities, and that would mean clustered things and God knows what. So I suggest to Dasgregor, have a look, review your material, see what the real purpose of Scientific Linux is. If a user wants to adapt it to their own ends, then they'll put up with a bit of ancient software, so to speak. And I put ancient in inverted commas because I really don't think it's that ancient. I mean, if people are still trying to run Mate, okay, yes, they've patched it a bit and whatever, but they're still essentially trying to run a majority code base, which was GNOME 2 series, then it means that there's some desirability in this. And you know what? I would say a lot of system administrators out there absolutely do not like change when that change is seen as unnecessary. And I'd say desktop change is seen for the most part as unnecessary and is possibly buggy bling bling. So that's not what I want to call KDE or anything like that. I think KDE does a wonderful job, but would I run the latest considered stable version from upstream of KDE on a server? Not on your Nelly. Not on your Nelly at all. So anyway, this has been Nick's User 1980 with a little bit of a rant. As I say, all respect to Dasgregor, but I disagree on this time. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this, probably very briefly looked at Scientific Linux and more sort of went around it, but I hope you appreciated it, and please give me your comments and suggestions. I'll also drop a link for the Dasgregor video down below so you can view that. Alright guys, catch you later.